All right, Lindsay here, branch manager at Applied Mortgage, just diving into part two of our market update for spring of 2022. Part one, we reviewed more of the basics of supply and demand. And some of you might have finished that and been thinking, okay, I get it. I've been hearing this all along. Supply is down. There's not a lot of housing inventory. Demand is up. But why is that? I mean, why is this such a different time than in the rest of history? So let's go a little bit deeper into the data and demographics on the demand and on the inventory. So demand was already projected to be high in 2020 to 2024 because this is the time that millennials are entering the housing market. So this was already, regardless of what happened with inventory, regardless of what was happening with really anything else going on here, millennials are the biggest generation and are entering prime home buying time. So you can see here 54% of the housing market was made up of millennials in 2020. Also, rents have been increasing at a rapid pace. So people don't want to rent if they don't have to. Rents have been increasing as much as almost 20% in some areas. The national median rent has increased by 17.8%. And it seems like it's just continuing to go up. So why rent? People don't want to. The pandemic also accelerated the work from home movement. So some people were already able to work remotely before the pandemic, but we saw that huge shift during the pandemic, during the beginning of 2020. And as we've come out of, or I should say, maybe just gotten into our new ways of life here after the pandemic, many companies are allowing their employees to continue working remotely. Why does that matter for housing supply and housing inventory? Well, it's really allowing people to live wherever they want and keep their same jobs. And in a survey that happened recently here, 84% of people want to work remotely. They appreciate that freedom and flexibility. It's really important to them. So it's changing the entire way that we as a country, really as a world, are actually living our lives. People want to work at their same jobs or at a job that allows them flexibility, and then they can choose to live wherever they want. That's causing people to migrate toward desirable places to live, whether it's here in the Pioneer Valley, where we have our great doctors and hospitals and academics and the 5 college system. People maybe are moving back here. Maybe they're moving from cities where the cost of living was a lot higher. So they're used to higher expenses and able to purchase the houses here, even though the prices seem like they've really increased dramatically. Wages have also been increasing. So this is showing the increase in wages over the last 22 years. And you can see that just in the last couple of years, there's been about a 10% increase in wages. This is showing the hourly rate, and this is from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics here. So wages are increasing. Now let's look a little bit at the supply. Homeowners don't need to sell their house. So we have all this demand, right? We have the huge millennial generation coming in. We have people able to work remotely. We have wages going up so people can qualify better. People don't want to rent because the cost of rent is higher. But now let's look at our supply. Why don't we have a lot of inventory? Well, homeowners don't need to sell because we just went through 2 years of the historically lowest interest rates in the history of the last basically 50 plus years. And people can afford their mortgages. Look at this mortgage debt service payments. So this is somebody's mortgage debt as compared to their income. And look at how low we are right here at the end of the graph. You can see people can afford their mortgages. We just had this huge refinance boom. Look at all of these refinance applications that we had in 2020 and 2021 here. People refinanced and their homes are even more affordable than they were before. They don't need to sell because they're not having problems paying their mortgages. People thought, oh, the pandemic is going to cause this huge influx in supply. People are going to not afford their mortgages. They're going to stop making payments. Well, the government put all these forbearance programs into effect, and people are coming out of forbearance just fine. Forbearances are down, and people have been able to recoup and come back into their regular mortgage payments. Foreclosures and bankruptcies are also down. Look at this graph here. This is showing from at the end of this graph here as we go into 2021. Foreclosures are kind of in the darker line, bankruptcies are the red line. We are on a downward trend. So this means that consumers' mortgage rates are lower. They have less to pay back on their mortgages, right? Their debt service is low. They don't have to sell their home because they came out of the pandemic fine. Maybe they took advantage of forbearance, but they were able to come out of it. There aren't new foreclosures and new bankruptcies happening at a greater rate, right? We are overall throughout history in a downward trend. And new construction, right? Where do we get our supply? If people aren't selling their homes, where does the supply come from? Well, we build homes. New constructions have been on a decline since the housing bubble in 2008 and really haven't recovered. Now, you can see that there was this dip in 2020 from the pandemic, right? We kind of had this giant pause as a whole nation, and then building did pick back up again. So good news is new permits, which is the light blue, and housing starts, which is the dark blue. You can see a little upward trend there. But when you look at this green line, housing completions are kind of on a downward trend comparatively, because what's happening is builders are pulling permits and starting builds, but it's hard to complete the build because of the supply chain issues. So builders are building, but it's not enough to cover that huge demand gap that we have right now. So before we head into part 3, we're going to talk a little bit more about inflation and interest rates, but that was just a deeper dive into the demographics and why our supply and demand chain is really just in an inventory crisis right now.